You're listening to My First Ride Podcast, episode number 1. Do you remember your first ride? You know, the first mode of transportation that gave you a newfound freedom when you were younger. Stick with me for a few minutes while I go back in time and explore some great memories of my first ride. I'm your host, Gary Neidert, and you're listening to My First Ride Podcast. In the future, I'll be recording conversations of people while they talk about their first ride. But on this episode, I'll state the questions that would be asked a future guest, and I'll give my reply. I wish I had somebody that could actually interview me and so they could think up other questions, but this is what we'll do today. This will give you an idea of what the show will be like in the future. So let's get right on into it. My first question that I would ask, where did you grow up during your high school years? Well, I grew up in a small town in North Texas called Denison, Texas. And it's supposedly the birthplace of Dwight D. Eisenhower, the president during the late 50s. And some people say it's in Kansas. I don't know. But I know where that house is over there. So I grew up in Denison, and small town. It was a railroad town, and eventually there were other industries that came in to this into Denison, but the railroad was the main thing. In fact, my dad worked for the railroad for years and years and years. My grandfather worked for the railroad, same railroad, before my dad. And my great-grandfather worked for that same railroad, although that was in San Antonio, I believe. So come from a long line of railroad workers. What was it like growing up in Denison? Well, you know, typical small town at that time. I think the population was probably 20,000 maybe, or less. Might have been less. The way I remember it, it wasn't a fast-paced town. I can remember, you know, the on Main Street. We're the time of this recording. It's in November, so people are starting to gear up for Thanksgiving and Christmas. But I remember the Christmas decorations that would be strung across the street on Main Street. You know, there is all lit up and everything like that, and the Christmas parades. And so it was, you know, just typical small town life. There was a sesquicentennial celebration, and the whole town got involved in all that. So again, it was a typical small town atmosphere. And at that point in time, you know, you grew up there. That to you, that's normal. To me, that was normal. I didn't know anything different. My cousins lived in Garland at the time. That was back in the late 60s, early 70s. And they, you know, there was a big deal to drive and visit my cousins. And we drive down there, go to the state fair. But I always liked coming back to Denison, you know, a small town. Next question is, okay, let's talk about your first car. Tell the story of how that came about. Well, as a kid, I loved cars. I loved car magazines, motorcycle magazines. I could tell you what the specs were on the cars and the motorcycles. I could do all that, but as far as schoolwork, it didn't hold my attention. I regret that. Now, I was more interested in the cars. I mean, I had a stack of magazines, probably 2-3 times that tall. and Hot Rod, Car Craft, Motorcycle World, Cycle World, all those old magazines from that. Rod and Custom, I think, was one. But I enjoyed the old hot rods of the time, and just reading the magazines that made me want, where I couldn't wait to get my first car. So there was a lot of anticipation leading up to getting my first car. Now, my actual first ride was a Honda S90. And my parents would go camping. I'd get to take the motorcycle with me on the camping trips. It would be something for me to do. I was like 14 years old, 13, 14. And so we'd go to the campgrounds, and as soon as we parked and got set up, I'd be off on the motorcycle, riding around, exploring. And so that was my real first ride. But I don't count it because I was pretty limited in where I could go and what I could do on the motorcycle. Although it was fun, I had a blast on that. We would go camping up on Lake Texoma on Preston Peninsula, if you've ever been there, and I would ride all over the peninsula. There was another family that we camped with that he had a motorcycle, and we would leave at 10 o'clock in the morning, not come back until sunset, except for food. But we had a great time. But leading up to the car, I had a friend of mine in high school, actually junior high. His name was Keith Brock. Keith's sister had a Volkswagen Convertible she was selling. I don't remember how I found out about it, but I found out about it. It was, when I first saw it, I went, oh man, this is really cool. Now, you think a Volkswagen, cool? Well, it was a Volkswagen Convertible. It was the British Racing Green. I don't know if that's the exact color name for it. It had chrome wheels and chrome hubcaps. It didn't have the standard painted steel wheels. They were chrome wheels. And of course, it had the black convertible top. It had a black interior. There were extra goodies on it. It had a wooden steering wheel and the 3-spoke steering wheel with the holes in the spokes and stuff. Kind of, a sports car kind of thing. There were wooden knobs on the door, on the window cranks, wooden knobs on the buttons on the dash. And something very unusual. This was a 64 model. It had a steering column lock. And I've not seen another 64 Volkswagen with a steering column lock on it. I have since found out that was an option that you could do, but I've not seen one. And, here we go. It's kind of like, that's kind of what it looked like. Sorry for the guys on audio, but this is almost the color of it. British Racing Green, except for mine had the black interior, and it had a little package shelf that was a wicker package shelf underneath, had a chrome stick shift and a wooden knob that you don't see that kind of customization on cars, on my Volkswagens at that time. What else? Had a Blaupunkt radio. I thought it was hot stuff till I figured out the radio didn't work very well. It was hit and miss on if I could listen to the radio. And beyond that, there was nothing necessarily special about it in terms of accessories or anything like that. Over the years, I took off those little Nerf bars on the bumper, so it eventually turned into just a bumper. That's all it was. None of the little extra goodies. I eventually took out the chrome tips to make it louder. I wanted to make it sound louder and throatier. And But whenever we started talking about it to Keith's sister, her name's Vicky, and her dad, and I didn't have the money for it, but my parents were willing to buy the car, and I paid them back for it. And I was 15. I was 15 years old at the time, and I couldn't drive it. So that was something I so anticipated, was the day that I could get my driver's license and drive my car. Oh, that was such a great day for me. My dad took off work, took me over to the highway patrol place in Sherman, where I took the test, the written test and the driver's test, and I got my license. I was free. I had freedom. I had freedom at that point, and it was so cool. And I don't know how much I got to drive that day to enjoy that freedom, but just to know that I had it made a big difference in my life. So what are some more details that you can remember about the car? Well, let's see. Even though the radio didn't work very well, I made some speaker cabinets to put behind the back seat, and I had it where there was a little lid that you could put stuff in this box, and at the time I did a pretty decent job on it, I think. But it had speakers back there, even though the radio didn't work all the time. At least I had some speakers that would sound better. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I'd owned the car for a while. I pulled the box out of the speaker boxes and that little enclosure thing out. And I found out that it was wet back there. And what was worse, it was growing mushrooms in the back of my car. And what a defeated day to think that mushrooms were growing in the back of my car. And, but I lived through it, suffered through it. What else? Some more details I remember. I used to polish on it all the time. I used to clean it and wax it, and I loved making the wheels shine. That was, to me, if you have clean and sparkly wheels and Armor All tires, this was in the days before Armor All and the tires, but if the tires and wheels looked really good, even if the car was not real shiny, that helped it to me. So I was always making sure that it was clean, and I'd wash it and wax it and all that kind of stuff, and clean the insides out. I mean, I'd go so far as to take the seats out, the two front seats out, and vacuum underneath the front. And they were easy to get out. I mean, it's not like the cars of today, but it. What else? I remember there was one time I was driving. Okay, I talked about the car shops. Or did I talk about the car shops, the viaduct? And yeah, I talked about the car shops and the viaduct and all that kind of thing. Well, Denison, that's where MKT, Missouri, Kansas, Texas, that's who my dad worked for. They had a rail yard north of town, and it's a big place, big place where they did all the switching of the cars. There was a road that went out by, it was called Ray Yards. It may be called Ray Yards still, I don't know. But there was a road that went out there, and I drove this car. I don't think I abused it, but I took it right up to the edge of abuse, because I drove it like I thought it was a Porsche. And that meant fast. And anyway, in this road going out by Ray Yards, I had it floored, and the little speedometer, it was just pegging on 90. Now, whether it was really going 90 miles an hour, I don't know, but it was one. So anyway, a lot of good memories about that. What's a memory that comes to mind about the car, or some experiences you had while owning the car? Well, oddly enough, back in that same road that goes out by Ray Yards, Guy Willis was with me, and a friend of mine that I've known since 7th grade, and a couple of others. Anyway, so it was right at the end of summer, and it was the sun was starting to shift in the sky, and you could tell summer was over, and there was just this sense in the air about, summer's winding down, all the memories of what we did during the summer. And it was in August, but yet it wasn't one of those terribly hot days, and it was close to sunset. And we were out on this road by Ray Yards, and there was a whole bunch of tarantulas going across the road. I've not seen anything like this happen since then, but we would stop in front of a tarantula, and with it right in front of the back wheel, and I'd rev the motor up and pop the clutch and spin out on top of the tarantula. And we just all had a real hoot, thought that was so funny. And so we did that. We did that for probably 20 minutes, looking for those tarantulas and doing that. And, kids, you think stuff is really funny as a kid, and it's still kind of funny to me now. But we just had a great time doing that. Are there any other memories? What other memories are there? Oh. Graduation night. So when I'm graduating high school, we went to, it was held at the stadium, the football stadium there in Denison. And we did our practice, and then we come back later on that evening for the ceremony. And it was a hot day. It was humid, and looking back on it now, I would have recognized the signs of it's leading up to, it's going to storm, but I didn't pay attention. But so we were in the stands, or we were sitting there waiting. The ceremony was done. We graduated. I got my diploma. I was terrified, wondering if they were going to really call my name. Did I really graduate? But thankfully I did. It doesn't mean I was dumb. I didn't apply myself as I should have. And I regret that, but small admission. So we're sitting there, some friends of mine, former girlfriend at the time, I don't know. But it started clouding up before the graduation was over. And it started, that ominous look in the sky and all these clouds and everything. And we were over behind the bleachers. All these people are close to the bleachers. And then all of a sudden it started pouring rain and thunder and lightning and all this kind of stuff. And so everything got rained on after the ceremony was over, and made a mad dash to get into my car. And we had this girlfriend, or whatever, girlfriend, I guess, at the time. We went somewhere and ate or did something, maybe back to my parents' house. I don't know. But later that night, as the thunderstorm began to leave the area. We were driving east, going back to my parents' house, and such an awesome display of lightning. And it made a big impression on me. And it happened to be that the radio was working that night. And so we were watching the lightning and listening to the radio. And it was like the lightning was in perfect time to the beat of the song that was on the radio. And I was just mesmerized with that. And that's one of those memories that I think back on fairly often. And just the impact it made to be able to watch that thunderstorm and to a light show, a timed light show put on by God Himself. And so that was another really important memory for me. It's funny, I can remember driving certain places, and that memory will come back. There's another road that it's kind of out in the country, but it's not. It's not in the country now. I was kind of in the country at that time, going to a friend's house, and just remembering the road and the trees and it was green. It was at the beginning of summer, and so it wasn't hot, and just the smells that are in the air of cut grass and all the different aromas that come through. I remember that, and why that one particular moment in time, just like a couple of minutes in time, but I still remember that. It was a lot of fun. Well, one of the experiences we went, Guy Willis and I, we went on it was a road rally, and it was a timed road rally where we had to maintain a certain speed limit, and we would get to these checkpoints, and we'd have to arrive at a checkpoint at a specific time. The closer you got to the time that was specified, the more points you got. And that took us all over. That started in Sherman, and Sherman and Denison right together. Started in Sherman, and then it went around Lake Texoma. I think it went around Hagerman Wildlife Preserve. And just, that was a lot of fun. That was the closest I could ever get to racing a car, I guess, was just doing the road rally, because I wanted to race. I wanted to be a car racer. And I wasn't real big into the drag racing, but more the road race, the twisty turns and stuff like that. And I would practice that with the with the Volkswagen. I would go. There was a park still there. It's called Waterloo Park. There were. It's a lake that's in Denison. Not a huge lake, but it's not a pond either. It's a pretty good sized lake, and the roads around it were dirt roads, dirt and gravel. Now they're all paved. We used to be able to drive across the dam, but you can't do that anymore. But we would go zipping all over Waterloo Park on those dirt roads, and drifting the people in drifting think that they've got something new. They invented something new. Well, we were doing something like that whenever back in the early 70s, we'd go down those roads and go sideways around the corner and go sideways around the other corner. And we thought we were hot stuff. We could do the Dukes of Hazzard moves before Dukes of Hazzard was around. We could be going forward and then hit the emergency brake, do a spin and go the opposite direction, or we could go backwards and spin around and go forwards. And we did all that kind of stuff. And I think I scared a few people that were riding with me when I would do that. But Um, we kept doing crazy stuff like that. It amazes me how I was able to survive those years without having a wreck, an accident, or hurting somebody. And I'm grateful. I'm grateful that nothing happened. But there were some people that tried to chase me, and they spun out. I'll just leave it at that. They spun out, and one didn't spin out, but he didn't make the turn. And but George Littrell will remember that one, I think. But we had a lot of fun in the car, and it was my car. It was my Volkswagen, my '64 Volkswagen Convertible. That was my car. Think back to driving around on a typical Saturday during the summer. What was your favorite song playing on the radio, and why? Well, like I said, my radio worked sometimes and sometimes it didn't. But I can remember around Waterloo Lake, Jeremiah Was a Bullfrog. A Mighty Good Friend of Mine was one of the songs that was playing back during that period of time. That was in my sophomore year, I think. Senior year, I can remember Nights in White Satin, and I grew to despise that song. Hated it. I heard it on the radio way too many times. Arlo Guthrie, City of New Orleans. I didn't despise it like I did Nights in White Satin, but I grew pretty tired of it because of a long weekend driving and listening to those songs. Right now, I can't think of any others that stick out in my mind. I didn't have a cassette player or an 8-track player, so I just had to rely on my on again, off again blah punk radio that was supposed to be hot stuff, but it wasn't. And I can't think of any other songs right now. But the bottom line is, it was a great time. It was a great time owning that car where I could pop the top down and go drive along, and I didn't have to be going fast to enjoy like at the end of the summer, and then, it's kind of warm, but yet it's comfortable enough. The breeze blowing, with the top down, the sound of the motor with the chrome tips taken out and giving it that little beefy growl. And it was fond memories. So anyway, that's my story of my 1964 Volkswagen Convertible, my first ride. Hopefully you enjoyed my journey back to the early 70s where I talked about my car. This is kind of what I want to do with my First Ride podcast. I want to talk with people about their first rides, their experiences. What kind of emotions did it bring about? What kind of good times did people have? What about you? What do you remember about your first ride? What was the emotion that you remember from that time? What's the nostalgic sense of thinking back on that period of time? Maybe you'll be a part of the My First Ride podcast. Well, what's coming up next on My First Ride podcast? I'm always searching for people that want to share their stories of what it was like to own their first car, truck, or motorcycle, and the fond memories associated with it. If you have a fond memory of your first ride, it's time to tell the stories of what it meant to you. The stories you can tell your kids and your grandkids. Would you be open to participating, telling your story? If yes, I would like to schedule a time where we can record a conversation. Contact me at myfirstridepodcast@gmail.com or call 972-771-7899. If you're watching this on Facebook, message me and we'll start the process of recording and sharing your story. Final thought. You may not have your first ride, but you still have the memories. It's time to share them. I'm Gary Neidert, and you've just experienced My First Ride podcast. Call me, 972-771-7899. Thanks for listening, and thanks for watching.